Yeah, I think just getting a solid plan together and kind of trying to get your hands around the data of what you have. And that's really the biggest step with any big program, you end up, if you start collecting data, you end up with a ton of data. Being able to get your hands around that data, use that data, effectively is, I think, one of the big first steps in making the transition plan work.
Well, hello and welcome to the ADA Shop Talk podcast. I'm your host, Paul Klein, and if you are an ADA coordinator, government official, architect, or accessibility specialist trying to better understand the ADA, then you are in the right place. The ADA Shop Talk podcast is brought to you by BlueDag. Check out BlueDag's Transition Plan Builder and Inspection Suite at bluedag.com. And yeah, trying to understand the ADA, that's can be a misnomer sometimes for some people or for challenged people like myself. But today's guest is somebody I met years ago, and honored to have him here because he's well connected and just a genuine guy. And I'm so excited to have him on here. It's Doug Anderson. He's partner with LCM Architects. He's a CASP. He's also a registered accessibility specialist in Texas. He's been involved with the Access Board, the ANSI stuff. I mean, man, just a plethora of experience and knowledge. Doug Anderson, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. And it's always great to start a podcast with some shredding guitar from Paul Klein.
Yeah, I'm bringing a little bit of that rock and roll, and if those of you can't see the Zoom, but Doug can see my Zoom on the recording here, and I've got guitars and Marshall amps back there, so I don't know, I can't hide it anymore. So I live in Nashville now.
Yeah, Paul's the real deal.
But no, thanks for coming. I know we met years ago, and when BlueDag first started getting started, and I think I ran into you. We were at the ADA symposium with our booth, and LCM's booth was next to us, and we just sparked up a conversation at the National ADA Symposium. Another reason why you should go, and you never know who you're going to meet and connect with. And I connected with you, Doug, and kind of stayed in contact over the years, and it's been good.
Well, yeah, that was great, and it was fortuitous because you guys were that link that we needed for our business as far as being able to put together reports and whatnot. And so, kind of a strategic partner in some ways for LCM over the years. So,
yeah, and LCM has been around. They're an architectural firm, but tell me a little bit about your experience with LCM, a little about what they do. I know they do accessibility training. I mean, super involved in the accessibility space. You think of LCM Architects and, just another architectural firm. No, folks, they're not just another architectural firm. They're one of the premier accessibility firms in America, and I can say that because I know it. but you tell the story better than I do, Doug, because it's your firm, and tell our listeners a little bit more about LCM and what you all do over there.
Okay, well, thanks, Paul. Well, LCM started back in 1996, and one of the things that made us unique is the founding partner is a wheelchair user and was on the Access Board at that time. Under the Clinton administration, and he wanted to start a firm that would do accessibility consulting out of the practice of an architecture firm. So we do traditional architecture, we do a lot of multifamily housing, we do a lot of government-related work as just regular architecture, but about 60% of our business is either ADA or FHA consulting.
Okay. Yeah. That's kind of its own vertical within the accessibility word in itself is the housing piece, and
yeah.
Weren't you guys I don't know if you still are or involved in the housing accessibility first, or did you teach with them? I remember there was a connection there at some point.
Yeah. When the Fair Housing First program started, it was around 2003. Cheryl Kent at the time reached out to us about being technical trainers, because there are not that many people in the country that especially at that time that we're up on the FHA requirements, design and construction requirements. So Jack and I, we became trainers at that point, and I don't know how many first trainers I've done over the years. We actually ran the program for HUD for it was 8 years that we actually ran the program, but then we worked with other people who have been running the program, Barron Point and Deloitte Touche and other groups that have had it over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, it wouldn't be right without mentioning LCM's success without Jack. So I had the opportunity to meet him, and unfortunately I heard, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, he passed, but obviously a legacy piece of LCM's history for sure, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Jack, as I mentioned, he was an architect and used a wheelchair, and so he had that perspective, which was great. But he had worked, on the Access Board and with a lot of different groups around the country on accessibility-related work. So it was an honor to work with Jack for so many years, and he was just a great guy. So I value all of that, and I feel like he's really passed on a lot of heritage and legacy onto our team here.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for those that are curious, LCM is in the Chicago area. I've been to their headquarters in downtown Chicago, kind of by the those waterfront river. I remember down there, if I remember right, wasn't too far. It was within walking distance. It was beautiful and location. And some of the clients you're working with, I know you work with both government and private, but I think you're pretty involved in the lodging industry. Would it be fair to say you work with some lodging firms? We don't need to mention any names, but in case anybody's listening and needs help there.
We've had the honor to work with a lot of great lodging, either brands or ownership groups. There's a lot of REITs that own a collection of hotels, and we've worked with them as their ADA partners in a sense, and helping them with new acquisitions or existing hotels, barrier removal, those types of things. And then I do represent the American Hotel and Lodging Association as their representative on the ANSI A117.1 committee as well.
Yeah, that's great. I never knew you were involved. I knew you were involved with a lot of things, but I didn't know you were involved with that. And that's really interesting. You and I were talking offline here about Kaylin Dunlap's experience with gaps in the ADA and the heights of beds and stuff. And you were like, well, that just happens. We're working on, and he started, I go, save it for the recording. But tell us about some of the things there or anything that Kaylin shared that sparked, your ears a little bit. I know there's a lot of things going on with ANSI and tell us a little about that.
Sure. So, it was the 2017 ANSI that we actually added a requirement for bed height because that, as Caitlin had mentioned, that's just been an issue from the beginning. And ADA standards were written, the general rule is if you turned a building upside down and shook it, anything that fell out was not covered by the standards. So beds, not being an affixed part of the building that was not covered. But I think DOJ is going to come out with some requirements, but based on what they were looking at as far as bed heights, we added that to the ANSI standards for transient lodging. And then one of the other things she brought up was just the issue of accessible tubs. Mm-hmm. And so I do chair the Accessibility Committee on ANSI, and that was one of the topics where the most recent round of changes that we've been looking at is, how do you make tubs better? When the 2010 ADA standards came out, the way the matrix was written, it was trying to clarify the number of roll-in showers that were minimum number that were required, but in essence, it also, the wording said, well, then the minimum number of tubs required. And so there became this confusion about, well, okay, then I have to put in tubs. And so a majority of our hotels put in tubs because of guidance from, different federal groups, and also, from the language in the 2010 standards. So we have a ton of tubs out there in hotels. And so we've looked at things like, if you're going to have the bench at the back of the tub basin, then you need to have a diverter and a hose, and the shower went on back there by that seat, and that was something Caitlin pointed out, which was a big gap in there. Was if you're sitting at the back of the tub, you can't reach
the controls. Yeah.
So that's one thing. Some other requirements regarding tub seats that we got into more detail on. So that'll be coming out in the new ANSI, which committee is hopefully finishing up our work this year, I'm hoping. So,
and what would that be? The 2024 ANSI? We had what was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Was the 18?
2017.
Was it the 17 or 18? They have.
Oh, actually, we finished our work in 2017, but yeah, it was the 18. So, so this will be the next version.
Next version of it.
Taking a little while to get to. But what's neat about ANSI is that ends up filtering into the ADA standards. So we will see a lot of those new requirements from the new versions of ANSI. Then in the next version of the ADA standards, which not exactly sure when that's coming out, but eventually it'll be there.
Yeah. You said something funny. Well, not funny, but I think it's funny. Oh, I shouldn't think it's funny, but you said, how do we make tubs better or more accessible? We put in more showers, don't we? Aren't showers generally, I guess that was the ambiguity. If someone just wanted to put in all showers, they really couldn't, because the table in the ADAS and the ANSI, I guess, said, no, you got to have a certain number of tubs. But I think showers are more preferred, aren't they, in general, or is it good?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And that's one of those things. If I could go back, I was on the ADA, on the access board when the 2010 standards. Well, when we put out the version in 2004 of the revised ADA standards, I was on the access board at that time. And I didn't think through the fact that table was going to result in, people. It was trying to clarify, because the previous version, in 1991, people were a little bit confused on whether the roll-in showers were part of the total or if they were in addition.
Right, I remember that.
So that chart tried to clarify that, but what we ended up with was a very positive. So anyway, for existing tubs, we're going to have some different options for those under ANSI. And I would love to see it where, the standards would allow all showers, but hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, it is interesting. I had another guest on just recently named Steve Twist. He's from out in California. He's a cast, but he's had polo since he was 9. So he's, gradually became dependent on a chair. And he said that if the even if the shower has one of those rickety portable, readily achievable, kind of cheap buy-offs, it's wobbly and it'll fail. He'd rather have a tub in that case, because he can at least support himself, even though there's no really good ways. It's just more solid, so yeah. It's always finding that sweet spot, but I've always generally accepted that showers are always typically preferred, kind of like urinals, for in the men's anyway, as opposed to, a regular toilet. So I've heard. I don't know if there's any science behind that or not. I'm sure there is somewhere, but
couldn't tell you.
Yeah. But that's getting into that whole realm of the science behind all the regs that I know there's much better experts than myself anyway, and so we rely on those folks. But how about I think I know the answer to this, but do you guys work with local governments with their Title II transition plans and self-evaluations as well?
Yeah, no, we've done that here in the city of Chicago, and then we have different cities that we've worked with around the country, and working with Denver right now. And so, yeah, we've had the opportunity to do that. I think we've worked in just about every arena for ADA.
Yeah.
Doing a big project with cruise ships right now. We get around. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we work on about everything.
That's awesome. When for those Title II transition plan, challenges, if you will, what advice would you have to a new ADA coordinator or someone who's, struggling with how to implement that properly in their agency, and just from your experience, any wisdom you can share with those folks? Because we do have quite a few ADA coordinators that are either trying to do the right thing or new or whatever, if you have any wisdom to share there.
Well, they should call LCM first off. No, just kidding.
Shameless plug. Oh, he did it. He did it. I'll have his link in the show notes, by the way.
No, there's lots of good consultants out there, and I wouldn't want to say that, there's lots of good resources out there. Yeah, I think just getting a solid plan together and kind of trying to get your hands around the data of what you have. And that's really the biggest step is with any big program, you end up, if you start collecting data, you end up with a ton of data. Being able to get your hands around that data, use that data, effectively is, I think, one of the big first steps in making the transition plan work.
Yeah. Yeah. And shameless plug, that's where Blue Dag comes in. And then you hire LCM to do all the surveys. Oh, wait, never mind. We got sidetracked there. So
we're going in a good direction here, Paul.
We are. The listeners are like, I'm going to go listen to Joe Rogan or something.
Yeah, we don't want that.
We don't want that. So, no, it's all good. But yeah, plenty of resources out there, and that's super helpful. And, back to more of a technical thing. You and I were talking offline before you came in. You said something that was really an analogy I loved. It was the pizza analogy. You feel like sharing that with me and the listeners again, or is that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I had someone ask me about, what's the biggest problem with accessibility consulting? And I said, well, people don't know how to cook a frozen pizza. They're like, what? And I said, well, when you take the approach to the same approach to cooking a pizza as you do to accessibility services, you're going to have problems. I mean, when you start off, you have to realize that the ADA is a civil rights law, and our goal is not to try to do as technically proficient a job as we can in cooking that pizza, but we want to make sure we have a meal and that it serves a purpose at the end of the day. So I think people don't see the big picture always. They get bogged down in trying to be so exact. My mom was a very detailed person, and loved her greatly. But when she would cook a frozen pizza, she'd stick it in the oven and she'd set the time a certain amount of time on the box, and then you couldn't take it out until the timer went on.
Yeah.
Even if it's turning brown or black, you say, "Mom, time to take the pizza out," and she's like, "No. It has to be this." So you miss some opportunities for accessibility if you get too focused or you don't see the bigger picture. I see arguments going on about just silly things. One recently where people or the building had put in a little holder for the toilet brush back in the corner in an accessible stall, or it was a unisex bathroom, something like that. And they said that they had gotten a complaint, or an inspector had come in and said that was non-compliant. Well, it could be that the clearance around the toilet doesn't talk about having that holder there, but there's that back corner of the toilet does not affect the accessibility. I said, the minute you can get a wheelchair back there, I will agree it's an issue. But,
right.
But until that happens, we need to look at things a little bit with some practicality and how we approach things. And we don't want to miss opportunities to make things better because we want to be just so dogmatic about things. I think about a situation where you have like indoor miniature golfing venues where, you have multiple courses. Now, to comply with the ADA standards to the T, you'd make 50% of the courses accessible, a minimum of 50% of the holes. But a lot of those have like automatic scoring systems in them. So the only way to really make that accessible is you have to have 100% of a course accessible. So either you could have, 4 courses that are half accessible, or you could have 2 fully accessible courses, and that's how you provide equal access. That's how you provide the same experience to disabilities. But you get people caught up in the details. I'm like, no, it says 50% of each course. So you hate to see that. And, history of people ripping out toilets for being 17 3/4 or 18 1/4 inches. Luckily, we've gotten past that, but those are the kinds of things that people got to keep their eye on the big picture.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that's so true, because you get so bogged down on the details that you miss the ramp that's at 9% because you're worried about the sign or the paint that really helps. Or in California, it's notorious for so much focus on truncated domes. Meanwhile, there's CASPs and code officials missing ramps and parking stalls that are oversloped because they're so caught up on trying to get the truncated domes right, which it's important. I get that. But to your point, you start getting so bogged down in the details, nothing gets done. And it's just, and you miss the big stuff. And I think another one to tie into your analogy is think about an accessible parking stall. It's 8 feet wide by just say 16 feet long, and it has a wheel stop. Well, the gap between the wheel stop and the sidewalk is, you can't even park a car there. But I've seen accessibility specialists put a torpedo down there and see that it's 2.2% and write it up and blow the whole parking stall up. And then now the business owner is all confused and worried about a little, 2.2% slope or 2.5% behind the wheel stop where no cars can even park and no one's going to traverse there on a wheelchair, but we're shutting the whole job down and causing a huge ruckus. So. They just burned the pizza and threw it in the trash. Yeah, they're not going to eat for a while. Exactly. Yeah, and I see that with, and I'm sure you do, Doug, and can appreciate this, and that is, when you go to mom and pops, the smaller, not the Fortune 500 companies, the Walmarts and all that, but the mom and pops in the world that you've worked with over the years, if you throw them a 14-inch binder with 400 pictures and 6,000 barriers for their little flower shop with, 1 door and a bathroom, they're going to throw that thing away and move on, and I think, help them get the big stuff, provide the greatest degree of access to the greatest number of people, and then worry about the minutia later, Yeah. You got to prioritize. You got to be able to know. You got to really think about, okay, why is this regulation here? Back to the clearance around the toilet. That regulation about the space around the toilet is for where the wheelchair is going to be at the toilet. It's not about, that space on the narrow side of the toilet. So yeah, I agree. That's so refreshing to hear. And I know we do a lot of training as you do, and you get myself. I was in that when I was first starting out. I was very ambitious. I remember holding up jobs as a code official for accessibility. And I think back, I go, man, what an idiot I was, and I go, I shouldn't have done that. I mean, there was more to consider. And, it was my lack of experience early on. And so for the new folks coming up behind us, I think it's really, not everything's black and white, and learn the whys and the behind everything, and then you can kind of come out with a better solution. So let's shift gears a little bit. That was good stuff. I might have to title this episode "Don't Fret." What was it? Or Don't Burn the Pizza. Don't Burn the Pizza with Doug from LCM. I think I'm going to do that. That'll be fun. I don't know if it'll spark enough interest, but we'll play with that one. That was a good one. But I know you work with a lot of housing. Housing is a what do you would call it? I that's an area I love teaching. That I do with our academy with Mark. I kind of took that on many years ago, and so that's kind of been my area of my sweet spot, if you will. And that area between public housing and private, is really a tough challenge. There's a lot of regulations, and it's really hard. But what are some some wisdom that you can share when it comes to housing, some best practices or things that you think can help, in that realm?
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a couple of things. So if you're looking at the Fair Housing Act, you really want to make sure you know what the local code requirements are, because you want to pick your safe harbor to be harmonized, or quite often there's a safe harbor that will match what your local code is, and so you'll save yourself a lot of hassle by doing that. There's a lot of resources. I mean, anybody that's working in multifamily housing, I'd recommend that you go through the technical training, the long overview for the Fair Housing Act Design and Construction Requirements that FIRST has. It's a really good program, and walks you through a lot of those details. And so I know that I've heard you say this on earlier podcast, but a lot of folks just don't get the difference between adaptable and accessible, and it's when you're in this field of accessibility, scaling back to think about adaptable is sometimes hard, right?
Yeah.
So so that's, I think that is one of the first big hurdles, and if you can get that set, then hopefully you're on the right path.
Yeah, and that's that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say a lot of architects use outside consultants for FHA consulting. Back when we had kind of the downturn in the market, a lot of banks ended up owning multifamily housing developments and finding out that some of them weren't FHA compliant. So a lot of banks now require some kind of statement from a consultant saying that it's FHA compliant. Yeah,
that makes sense. And just for those listeners that may not be familiar with the safe harbor provision, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Fair Housing Act recognizes, I think, 8 or maybe it's 10 different safe harbors, and that could be the ICC, IBC, could be a couple of different versions of that, I believe it is, of the IBC, ANSI. I know there's some others in there. I don't know. I can see the list in my mind, but I can't remember exactly which ones they are. We don't need to go through all of them, but just wanted to point a few out if we could.
Yeah. What HUD tried to do recently was update the safe harbors to include more recent versions of the IBC, because a lot of the safe harbors have gotten so out of date. There were no longer any state or local governments that were using the versions of IBC that were referenced. Standard. So
that's right. It was like the 97 IBC or something, and it's great and stuff, but having it more up to date. And I wish I don't want to talk about California. Never mind. You're from Chicago, so I wish 11A in the CBC would become safe harbor. I mean, it's pretty dang close, but it's not officially a safe harbor. But I would support that. Yeah, it's so dang close, and it's like many states. I don't know that there's many states that actually. Are there any states that have DOJ certification for the ADAS? Like does Texas, remember they used to be certified equivalent, safe harbor. Yeah. For the ADA. That's right. I would have to go back and look to see whether other states are in that category. I know there were other states that talked about it. California talked about it for a while. Yeah. But California just has a lot of unique things, a lot of really good things. I mean, I like a lot of the things in the California building code as it relates to accessibility. Not everything, but I like it. I'm with you on that one. So how about public housing? Do you have a experience with that? Or you guys deal with that a lot, or is that more smaller part of your portfolio?
I mean, we've worked with Chicago Housing Authority and some other groups, but that's not the majority of our work. The majority is private developers.
Okay. Yeah. And that's where that merger comes of when you're dealing with public housing, you have, the ADAS and the fair housing and these safe harbors. So you really have a multitude. And then if you're in a state like California, you could end up having four different codes or regulations all converging on one project. And I find it fascinating and a challenge. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to solve this. The other, go ahead.
I just I'm with you. I mean, I've been doing this it started in 1992, working with the Great Lakes ADA Center. So I've been doing this a long time. And there's only so many toilet center lines you can measure and have it still be exciting. So when you have something meaty like that, you can dig into. It's a lot of fun. I agree.
Yeah, this one came up. I want to throw this one at you, and you may or may not know, but it's more of a general concept, and it has to do with the ADAS. And I ran into this the other day, and I've been struggling with it, and that is in the ADAS 2010 ADAS. It talks about for elevators, it says for elevators in 104 that you have to use the ASME standard, A17, I think it is, 0.1, but it references like the 2000, 2002, and 2003, which is old. And what's always been confusing is it's not real clear as whether or not, like when there's a reference standard in the ADAS, are you allowed to use a newer reference standard? Like the ASME has a 2019, 16, and a 2022. So in your experience, and you may or may not, I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but I mean, when it comes to reference standards, can the designer choose to use a newer reference standard if they want, maybe under equivalent facilitation or something along those lines? Have you ran into that before?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I would have to research that more, but I would think that it would be equivalent facilitation because usually the standards, they don't get less stringent, they get more stringent.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I was thinking too, in 2002 and everything, when some of those original standards were adopted, they didn't have like touchscreen technology yet. So what if there's a better way to serve people this? Yeah. You'd be prevented. So I can't imagine that not being allowed. It goes back to, you know how it is, Doug, when there's an issue or a challenge at hand, what makes the most sense for people with disabilities? And on that fundamental basis, I'm like, why couldn't I use a newer standard that allows a better, more accessible environment than having being strictly on the old one, And anyway, I just came to the top of my head, and that was one of those challenges we have as a consultant and that come up. So
yep, yeah, no, those things do come up, and sometimes it's frustrating when you run into people who don't know how to cook the pizza, and then you're having an argument.
Yeah.
That's some silly thing. Yeah.
Dueling CASPs or dueling ANSI certified or whatever. So,
how many angel wheelchairs can you fit on the head of the pen? Right?
That's right. Well, let me get one last question in here. Man, I've got so many I want to ask you, but I can't take up your whole day. You're a busy man and got a big firm to run. But let's see here. I'm going to end with, what was one of your biggest mistakes or learning lessons you had when you first, or at any time when you were applying the ADA or accessibility in general? One of the biggest mistakes or learning lessons you had when you in this ADA space. So something that comes to mind over the years.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say there were none, but good judgment comes from bad decisions, right? From that experience. I think one of the things that actually was a problem was, do you remember, so the 91 standard, the way the chart was written for roll-in showers versus non-roll-in showers, you could technically use all roll-in showers at that point. And I had a project that kind of spanned the gap. It started under the 91 standard, and it delayed and ended up under the 2010 standard. And So we were looking at, equivalent facilitation for using, all roll-in showers, and ran into somebody who, didn't want to look at the bigger picture, and very adamant that no, it had to be all, this many tubs and this many roll-in showers, and so that created a lot of headaches for the owner and us. So so that's probably, if I look at all of the missteps, that's probably one I would love to do over.
Yeah. Yeah. And how many total years have you been? You've been with LCM like 26 something years, but how long have you been doing accessibility? Over 30, right? At least.
Yeah. So I started in 1992. The Great Lakes ADA Center had just gotten a grant from the Department of Education, so they were hiring their first batch of people. So I was one of the first people there. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a hope for everybody listening out there. If you feel like you've just gotten into this, last couple of years, or, you don't know all the different regulations. I mean, you and I started around the same time. I went to building inspection code classes in 93 and became, started learning about the ANSI and accessibility. So very similar, but even as this late in the game with 30 plus years from both of us, we're still learning. We don't know it all. we make mistakes or I don't want to call them mistakes, but we made misguided consulting or calls, and I had some last week, it's just the nature of the business. And, the important thing is we continue to learn, and call your network. People, I call Doug sometimes, when I've got a challenge. Sumo out in California with housing is another one I call. Kaylin and then Jim Terry. I mean, so there's a lot of resources out there. But this is great, Doug. I appreciate you coming on. What's the best way for people to connect with you? And I'll put all the links that you share here with us in the show notes.
Yeah, my email address, banderson@lcmarchitects.com. But my cell phone number, I always have my cell. 312-914-1717. So that's probably the second best way to get a hold of me.
All right, I'll put that in there, and the website, LCM's website, and your LinkedIn profile as well for everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Doug Anderson with LCM Architects. Just great knowledge base. I hope you enjoyed that interview. And Doug, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fun. Working with you again more recently than latter, but and we've got some can't say who it is, but some pretty high profile projects we're working on coming up here.
It's gonna be a fun year.
It's gonna be a great year. So thank you so much for coming in, Doug, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thank you.